So with the time after the Battle of Endor taking such prominence in current Star Wars material, I figured it was a good time to take a look at Imperial Warlords, the leaders of the Empire that chose to take their troops and go their own way. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, Imperial Warlords played a huge part in the fall of the Empire from Legends. Which, by the way, most of this video will be discussing Imperial Warlords from Legends because we know basically nothing about them in canon. But in Legends, after the Battle of Endor, the Empire fragmented. Imperial leaders like Moffs, admirals, and regional governors took the troops under their command and tried to found their own little empires, figuring that they could grab power for themselves. Many of them had aspirations of unifying the Empire under their own control. However, ultimately only a few would end up doing this. But with each of these leaders vying for power for themselves, they ultimately spent a lot of time fighting amongst each other. This infighting would ultimately accelerate the downfall of the Empire, and seriously reduce its strength, which was desperately needed when they were coming up against outside factions like the New Republic. As for the size and power of these Imperial Warlords, well, it varies pretty wildly based on which warlord we're talking about. Some commanded massive fleets led by Executor-class dreadnoughts, while others only had 1 or 2 Star Destroyers under their command. As I mentioned before, they spent a lot of their time not fighting against the New Republic or rebel cells, but instead fighting against other Imperial Warlords for control over patches of space. It was this infighting that allowed the New Republic to sort of hide in the corner and lick its wounds after the Battle of Endor. The Empire was too busy fighting itself to really come after them. That doesn't mean these warlords never posed a threat to the New Republic. There were a few notable ones who were able to unify large sections of the Empire and lead campaigns against the New Republic. Warlords like Thrawn and Zinj posed a serious threat to the new democracy. Imperial forces unified under their command had enough numbers and strength to seriously overpower what the New Republic could bring to the battlefield. But for every warlord that posed a serious threat, there was easily 2 or 3 that were minor inconveniences for a government like the New Republic, which, by a few years after the Battle of Endor, had a significant military. So what exactly is an Imperial Warlord? Well, obviously, Warlord itself is not an official title, simply a position that an Imperial leader might find themselves in after the death of Emperor Palpatine. In fact, many Imperial Warlords chose not to refer to themselves as warlords, instead preferring to use their official ranks like Admiral, Moff, or Governor. That being said, there were a few that really did embrace the title of Warlord. Admiral Harsk, for example, would start referring to himself as Supreme Warlord. And on top of that, not all of these warlords were loose cannons. Some still had vague intentions of following orders from Coruscant. The problem was, by that point, Coruscant was a mess. With the riots following the death of Emperor Palpatine, and eventually an invasion by the New Republic, there were basically no more Imperial orders coming from the planet. And with the Emperor dead and no proper line of succession set up, all of these warlords thought they were the rightful heir to the Empire. So in Legends, most of the 25 years of the Galactic Civil War was actually spent fighting these Imperial Warlords. While the Empire in any formal capacity really did kind of dissolve after the Battle of Endor, only to reform for brief little spurts of time. So let's talk for a second about how this could relate back to canon. Well, there is one character that I think might actually be an Imperial Warlord, and that is Moff Gideon. We don't know a ton about Moff Gideon's allegiances or who he works for, but we know that he seems to be commanding Imperial forces 6 years after the Battle of Endor. This is long after the Imperial surrender at the Battle of Jakku, which means he's almost certainly a regional warlord or an Imperial holdout, likely with little or no allegiance to any organized segments of the Empire. Instead, probably only out for his own gain. And of course using Imperial forces that would have been under his command during the days of Palpatine, which would make him the only Imperial Warlord that we know in canon. Ultimately, these Imperial Warlords were the shattered remains of what was left of the Imperial leadership structure after the collapse of the Imperial government. As I mentioned, many of them were Moffs and Admirals and other leaders that had existed in the Imperial command structure before the Battle of Endor. If you want to learn about that Imperial command structure immediately after the Battle of Endor, specifically between the Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments whether you think Moff Gideon is an Imperial Warlord or if you think he's actually working for some greater Imperial force. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.